Bigger footy time. We are back, and we are back in a big way because it is the best week of the year. We're going to spend a little bit of time reviewing the two prelims, but of course we've got to preview the big game. It's the grand final. It's the one we've been waiting for. It's Geelong and Brisbane. But before we get into all that, I've got to introduce the team. I've got Link in the studio with me, mate. How you doing?
I'm going well, Leggy. Good to be here. And as you said, it's like Christmas time for footy fans, so couldn't be more excited.
It is the best time, and I mean, the whole week is great. There's so much going on, and we'll get through all that. But we've got JJ as well, who's going to be in his little mobile studio, I believe, with the Brownlow on tonight. He's got to do a little bit of radio work, so he's all across the state. But we've got JJ joining us. How are you, mate?
Going well, boys. Yeah, I'm actually still getting set up on the fly here, but looking forward to this grand final. I thought, without blowing the trumpet off the top, okay, I am, but I did think that the loser of Geelong and Brisbane could still go the long way round and make it, and that's the way it's turned out. It's felt like Geelong and Brisbane and maybe Collingwood have been the best two or three teams when they've played their best footy, and that's what we've got. So hopefully both can play their best on Saturday.
Absolutely. That's how it has panned out. I think a lot of people thought that, but I tell you what, there was some serious doubt after Geelong beat the Lions in the qualifying final, but thankfully we've got that matchup again. I think we'd all argue, or all agree, that over the last 6 to 7 weeks, they've definitely been the two best teams. But before we get into preview mode, let's just go back a step or two. Let's go back to Friday night. We had the Cats and the Hawks. I think we all thought that the Cats deserved to start the game as favourites, but we thought that there was still a chance the Hawks could roll them given their form. But that, JJ, was a seriously powerful second half performance from the Cats.
Yeah, it was. It was pretty amazing, wasn't it? And one man, a 35-year-old with 359 games of wear and tear on those tyres, was able to get the job done. And, I mean, it was an incredible individual performance. Link will probably be able to find the last time Danger had 30 and 3 in a game. I mean, he probably hasn't done it that many times in his career, but to be able to do that, set a record, I think, 30-plus, 20-plus contested possessions and 2 or more goals in a game. Might have been 3 or more goals in a game, but I think it was a finals record. And he just had one of those nights. And, look, for him to have one of those nights and guys like Dusty and superstars, it's a whole different level. But as a player, I reckon once or twice a year, and I don't really reckon it matters what level of sport you talk about, but I reckon once or twice a year, once or twice a season, you have a game where you kind of don't feel fatigued. Like, fatigue doesn't really get you. You're just in the zone. And that was the case for him. Like, he was putting in maximum effort. Like, he'd run in, dive into a contest, stand up with players hanging off him, get it out to a runner. And then the very next contest, when you expect him to be cooked and gassed, he was ready to go again. So you do feel like that once or twice a year. And equally, once or twice a year, you feel like you just can't move and you can't go at all. So he was in the zone against Hawthorn. They had no answer for him. Brisbane, I think, will have an answer or two for him. We'll get to that at some stage. But he led the way in a manner, I'll be totally honest, and you guys know he's a good friend of mine. I didn't know he still had that level in him.
Well, his last game where he had 30-plus and 3-plus was round 23, 2019. He had 34 and kicked 4 goals, 3 against Carlton. That was game 245.
Wow.
The prelim final was game 359. So he hasn't done it in over 100 games, but he's saved it for the most... Well, the biggest night of the year so far.
And you just said it, JJ. He's a close mate of yours. This is why I want to ask you, is that the best game he's ever played?
I probably think so. I probably do think that's the best Danger's ever played. Now, he's got a game of, again, Link's got his numbers, but he had
48 against North in 202016.
I think the significance, though, of a prelim, surely that's there.
Yeah. So, and sometimes numbers can be misleading, 40 and 45 can sometimes be a bit misleading. Clearly, you've played amazingly, but just the separation he was able to cause in that game and the highlight tape in terms of what he did at contest, that was the Dangerfield of, what I played with it at Adelaide in 2015 and 2014, like running to a contest, diving on the ball, picking it up and standing up with bodies hanging off him and then being able to distribute the ball. Like, it was incredible. He finished around goal, which hasn't always been his strength either. So, can he replicate something? Now, we don't expect him to have 30 and 3 in the grand final, but can he play and have that level of impact again? That's going to be the question, because he was coming off the fortnight's rest. He hadn't played for, 14 days or so. Now he's got to back it up off 8 days, which is not too bad, but clearly when you're older, you want to have more rest.
And it was just getting back into the game, it was a bit of a chess match between two of the 3 or 4 best coaches in the league with Sam Mitchell and Chris Scott. We tried to predict some of the matchups. We thought Mullen would go to Newcomb. In the end, it was Atkins to Newcomb. Mullen went to Watson. There was a number of really intriguing matchups. But JJ, were you surprised by some of the moves that Chris Scott went with to try and curtail some of the Hawks' strengths?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I was pretty confident that that would be the case, and Mullen would go to Newcomb because I looked at the clearances and Newcomb was able to get against Adelaide, and I thought, well, probably the first 3 centre clearances, Mullen would tackle him, and they would be either forced and rushed handballs or they'd be ball ups. But Tom Atkins can do the same job. Like Tom Atkins, I thought was the second best player on the ground in the prelim, 24, 25 disposals, late 11 tackles, really impactful. He's hard to tackle as well, so he's a great tackler, but he's hard to tackle when he gets the ball in his hands, makes pretty good decisions with the ball as well. So, yeah, they got their matchups right. I certainly wouldn't have picked, you could have given me a few guesses and I wouldn't have got Mark O'Connor on Weddle, and that probably speaks to the opinion that the industry has of Josh Weddle. That took him out of the game. D'Ambrosio on the other wing didn't have an impact in the game. So all of those guys on the periphery for Hawthorn, those flankers and wingers that are really important to their system, didn't have a good night. And then their sort of second and third tier midfielders, I don't think Ward touched the ball in the second half, which is a damning thing when you're playing, mostly in the midfield. So he's got some growth. And clearly, when you look at what Hawthorn weren't able to do, you can understand why they're keen to get a gun midfielder.
And we spoke about Danger and his domination, obviously, but it's pretty much domination for the Cats really after the midway point of the second quarter. They got the game back and they were absolutely firing shots at goal, getting inside 50s late, and they just got their noses in front of half-time, which felt big given the way the Hawks had started the game. What did you see, JJ, in I guess, the Cats' contest work, and how were they able to overcome a pretty average start to get right on top of the game and then completely dominate?
Yeah, once they were able to sort of steady and level up, and when they were only, what was the score at quarter time? It was 3 goals for, so it was 22-9 at quarter time, and I thought it should have been a bigger lead to Hawthorn, and that's why, if you're a Geelong fan, I reckon you should have felt pretty good because, Stewart was down, Henry was down. The game maybe should have been shot to pieces or close enough to a really threatening margin. Thankfully, Jack Henry's able to come back on the ground. He looks okay and should be fine for the grand final. They lose Stewart, which is a blow, but when Tom Stewart goes out of the team, Zach Guthrie basically just says, no worries, I'll just morph into that role. That's no problem, and he plays that role well, and we've talked about this across the year, haven't we, with Stewart? Like he hasn't had the biggest season of all time. And I reckon that's been less about Stewart being out of form or being a bit quiet and more about the Cats trying to prioritise Guthrie, trying to get Lawson Humphreys more comfortable with that intercepting role as well. So he's not going to be there. He's an important piece. You definitely want him in the team. But Guthrie and Humphreys and potentially a few others, they might be well set to cover for him.
JJ, we've got a lot of time to speak about the Cats, and we will, as they've got the grand final next week. But to put a bow on Hawthorn's season, semi-finals, they go out last year, they go a week later in the season this year, and they were really tested Geelong for periods of that game. How do you sort of wrap up their season?
Oh, I like them. Anytime you make a prelim final, and I try to make this a habit of mine of wrapping up the teams that make the prelim final and don't quite make it, because it's a great effort. I mean, it's, 18 teams in the competition. You get down to the last 4. Clearly Geelong and Brisbane have separated themselves and have proven they're the best 2 teams in the competition. So Hawthorn have made a great leap. I mean, they were zipping 5 early last year. So they've made massive strides. But clearly, I think we can all identify, can't we, that they need a bona fide A-grade midfielder. I think we're at the point, I personally think we're at the point, Hawks fans will say, we've got Will Day, but Will Day's had multiple navicular injuries. He's had multiple other injuries. Now, I pray that he never misses another game in his career. But the reality is he misses as many games or more games than he actually plays. So they need to get another midfielder. They need to continue to get that development from, Mitch Lewis, who can hopefully stay on the park as well. Hopefully Watson continues to develop in his game. Moore and Ginnivan and Amon and these guys should still be able to play some good footy. I like what they've got down back. Lloyd Meeks a solid ruckman. So I don't see why they're not in the same position next year. You guys agree with that?
I would 100% agree with that. I think, look, we don't know. Crystal ball, will Zach Merritt be there? Will they go after another potential midfielder? They obviously need that to go to the next level. But I think with the development of the players that they've got already, the way Sam Mitchell's coaching, I think there's a lot of growth for the Hawks. I mean, let's not forget, they were one game away last round of winning that and potentially finishing third. They finished 8th. They still made a prelim. Like, they're right up there as far as I'm concerned. And I wouldn't be worried. I think they need to look at these last 2 years' results as positive. They've won some finals. They've had players out, and they've got a midfield that you think would get better with some potential personnel changes.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'll be. I think the same spot. Yeah, it's always hard to predict because teams can bounce, and not many people would have had Geelong as Premiership Grand Final favourites started this year, so it's always hard to predict that. But I think absolutely prelim should be where they're aiming next year again. Yeah,
definitely. We've got to move on, as Link said, put a nice bow on the Hawks season and put a nice bow on that prelim, because we've got Saturday's clash, Collingwood and Brisbane. And JJ, I just want to go with you because you just never wavered on the Lions, even though they had the disappointing loss to the Cats. They've had the Lockie Neal injury. They've had Berry injured, shoulder, back. We sort of thought maybe the Suns could get him in the semi, but they absolutely got through them. And then that was just an unbelievable performance, because at half-time of that prelim final, I think we thought the Pies had well and truly wrestled back momentum, had a dominant second quarter, and then the Lions just said, nah, we are going to steamroll here in the third quarter. It was impressive.
Yeah, unbelievable effort. I mean, early in that game, Brisbane were playing the game exactly how they would have wanted to. It was uncontested mark chains. It was quite easy for them in the first quarter. 4 goals, 3 to 1 goal, 1 at quarter time. We all knew that Collingwood would make some type of run, but I don't think it'd be that significant a run in the second quarter. It was 6 goals to 0 in the second quarter, and then all of a sudden you're thinking, and I've clearly watched Brisbane super closely over the past 3 or 4 years. And I think they've developed so much. 4 or 5 years ago, they would miss easy shots at goal in big finals. They would burn each other and try and be the hero. They would probably lose their way and drop their bundle in this type of situation 4 and 5 years ago. But now I think they've got the heart of a champion. Now, whether they can be champions this week, we'll find out. But to be hammered like that in the second quarter, to give up 6 unanswered goals, to go in 2 and a bit goals down and with 95,000 against you, and then to just come out and just go whack, whack, whack. Like, I think that is the real heart of a champion. And they were able to kick 7 goals in the third quarter. And again, they're proving that even though they've got players out, they've got players who just step up. Ty Gallop, just stands up and has a massive second half. Charlie Cameron gets involved and hits the scoreboard. And I mean, Logan Morris only kicks 1 goal, but how many times did he bring the ball to the front for others? And some of his field kicking in the second half was incredible. So they are so admirable. That's why I've got so much time for them. Again, though, they still feel like they're on the cusp. Like, they're right at the cliff's edge. They're trying to make sure they don't fall off the cliff, but they're not far away. And they're going to come up against a team who are pretty healthy. So I couldn't speak more highly of what they're able to do in that prelim final. I think it's the most impressive win they've had in some time.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was going to say, Link, what they've done needs to be celebrated, because we've even looked back on this show and spoken about the teams that have won the premiership the next year. They've struggled. The Pies won a grand final in 23, missed the finals in 24.
Well, no team had won a final the following year from a premiership since Richmond in 2020.
Exactly. It's just incredible, really, to not only think that, but then the way they've done it, JJ. I mean, obviously Neal's had his injury issues. Hipwood's been out. They've just had so many. Jack Payne as well, who you've been big on as well, is a massive loss across the back line. Like, it really, I think, I don't want to exaggerate too much, but that is one of the best prelim wins I reckon we've seen in the last decade.
Yeah, and I reckon they won the game. And this is why I do rate them so highly. So in the first quarter, they built a 3 and a bit goal lead on the back of their uncontested mark game. And we all know that's coming. Collingwood know that's coming. But you can't stop it. Their system is so good. And they've got so many great kickers. And we'll get to the preview of the grand final shortly. For a long time, it's been about Zorko. Stop Zorko and you can stop that back half ball movement. But now I can mount an argument Darcy Wilmot's just as good as Zorko, and Jasper Fletcher's on his way to being as good as both, if not better. He's got great leadership. He's so sound as well. And, Leicester kicks the ball better than any time he has in his career. So they're able to build and generate those uncontested marks. But then in the third quarter, it was a win by stoppage scores. That, Ashcroft kicks a goal out of nowhere from ground level. They're able to get stuff happening from stoppage. And that's why I think they are a dangerous team, because more so than any other team, they can go to plan A, which is 125 uncontested marks in a game, but they can go to plan B, which they did in last year's prelim, and they did it again in this year's prelim, where they can win it by scores from stoppage or they can win it in chaos. So incredibly impressive performance. Let's spend a couple of minutes on Collingwood, though, because they built their list and they went into the season openly telling us that they don't care how old they are in it for the now, and that's fine. But I think that's only a positive, provided you hold up the cup. They don't hold the Premiership Cup up, and now they've got some interesting questions going into next year. And I think, you guys can add to this. I don't know if Membry should be a first choice player going into next year. I certainly don't think Mason Cox should be. Do you let Myercheck all of a sudden move along and bring in someone else? I think they've got a young player in the VFL in that type of role who they're pretty keen on. Do you start to evolve that list now? Because the aim was to hold the cup up. You're definitely going to go forward with Pendlebury and Crisp and Sidebottom and Howe. So those guys are going to play. You've basically got no one in that team under 25 outside of Nick Dacos and Ned Long. You've got to find young players. Otherwise, they'll get to the end of next year. And if they don't win it next year, then they're stuffed.
We've spoken a lot throughout the year on Collingwood's selection of certain players and non-selection and how they've balanced their team. Bobby Hill was one that has been spoken about for months leading into this final series. They didn't take the risk on him. We just spoke about Paddy Dangerfield and how well Geelong have managed him to be performing in a prelim final. On the other end of that for the Pies is Scott Pendlebury, who maybe through no fault of the Pies and himself, but clearly wasn't managed to the point where he's ready to hit his straps in a prelim because he doesn't even get on the park.
Yeah, well, I mean, Leggy, you were there. Did you have the eagle eyes on him? Because they tell me that he spent a lot of time with the doctors and physios before the game. So clearly he had some type of niggle, and then 3 or 4 minutes in, it goes ping and he's done.
Yeah, so I did see him in the warm-up. I thought maybe just, he's an elder statesman. Maybe this is just what happens when you get to that certain age demographic. But I was a bit concerned. And then the first thought when he got subbed out was, should he have played? Because all of a sudden you lose a sub. If you can make that late change, then obviously you can kind of bring someone else in. So I did see it. He must have carried something into the game with him, and that's why he wasn't quite ready, because such a professional player, I find it very hard to believe that he would actually hurt himself in the warm-up. So yeah, it was a really bizarre one, especially for someone as professional as he is. But to your point, JJ, on where the Pies are at next year, I think I'm fascinated by what they do with the forward line. I think there's a lot of talk that Myercheck could be potentially on the move. I think he's got a better offer elsewhere. Would be surprised if he stayed there. You've got obviously the Membry side of things. There's Bobby Hill. And then you look at that midfield group as well. I totally agree with you. I almost feel like they need to have a bit of a mini regeneration, because at some point Sidebottom and Pendlebury will go, and that'll obviously, and Crisp as well, and that's gonna hurt them massively. Look, McStay, another forward who just hasn't been able to find any form due to all of his injuries. So they're a massive watch. You spoke before, Josh, about whether the Lions could fall off a cliff. I wouldn't be shocked if the Pies were to fall off a cliff, and that's when you start to think, well, if they didn't hold up the cup this year, which they're not going to do, it probably is a bit of a failure. Can I just tie a little bit of a bow on them, JJ? Just in terms of their performance, we've lauded Brisbane. In terms of the way the Pies played, how can you how do you view that? Is where did it go wrong for them? Because I'm looking at half time and I'm thinking they're in a really solid spot, and they just totally lost their way in that second half.
Yeah, and that's why they do want to play. And now it doesn't ever feel dour, because they've always got a massive crowd behind them, and they're always up and about, and the energy's always there. And they do have Nick and Josh Dacos who can, do magical things with the ball. But they do look to go long down the line purposefully a lot. It actually is quite a dour game style. It's not a game style that sort of lights you up and makes you get excited to go and watch them. It is often, long down the line. They're really eager to stay close to the boundary. It's a bit of a throwback to Mick Malthouse's team that won a premiership way back when. They want to stay close to the boundary. They want to go long down the line, hence why they brought Mason Cox into the team for that type of role. So it's it's a game plan that has served them well. But when you go back to their premiership team, their halfback turnover game, which is what Brisbane excels in, their ability to turn the ball over at halfback and then just get downhill with the Dacos boys, with Chris, with Penalbury, with Sidebottom, with those guys getting involved in the game. And that's where Dan Houston was supposed to come into it. But he's been space jammed. He's had his talents taken from him. I'm not sure what's going on there. He needs to have a massive off-season because we all know he's a star. We all know it's there. We all know he's a dual Australian, but he just hasn't been able to get going at all. They need him to be, 30% better this time next year. So it's interesting. I reckon they'll make some tweaks to their game plan. The other one that we haven't mentioned up front is Jamie Elliott. I believe there's strong interest from Gold Coast. He's got some ties or some links to Queensland. There are some people who think he has always wanted to finish his career in Queensland as well. So kicked 60 goals, was their best player in the prelim final. So his signature's not there yet either.
Well, surely after a performance like that, if you're the list manager at Collingwood, you've just got to a certain extent, suck up your pride and go, all right, he is our best player in a prelim final. We've already potentially losing Myercheck. We've got some older players in that forward line. We just have to re-sign him at any cost.
Absolutely. And I think even more so when you look at the fact that they are in the window now. This isn't about, if they think that they're in the window now, this is a player like Jamie Elliott is someone that you cannot afford to lose.
Problem is they've potentially have already tied their hands with all these other re-signings like Howe and Pendles and Sidebottom and those guys. They've all re-signed. They've all signed on. They've all, they've probably, I'm sure they've accounted for Elliott in terms of the re-signings, but, at what price? Have they probably expected him to be 2 years at $450 a year, maybe, and he's playing like a $650,000 player. So, I don't imagine there's a lot of space in that salary cap considering the players that they've got at the top end. Darcy Moore and Nick Dacos and Josh Dacos and Houston, those guys would all be on either $1 million or very, very close to. So I don't think there'd be much room to move. So interesting off-season for the Pies, and I guess these are the tiny margins we play at when you talk about prelim finalists.
Absolutely, but we have to move on because there is a reasonably large game on Saturday that we need to cover off. Of course, it is the grand final. We're going to go through a few different questions, scenarios, want to get everyone's views on the major matchups, some predictions and all of that. But firstly, Josh, we know the Cats are going to go in as favourites. They're not necessarily heavy favourites, but it's a strong enough sort of price in the market. But I want to ask you, as the Queensland football ambassador, whatever you call yourself, the Northern States ambassador, how do the Brisbane Lions win the grand final?
Well, they've actually got really good recent evidence. I know they were handled in that first final, but they took care of Geelong in Geelong earlier in the season. They won the first game up in Queensland as well. I think their primary aim has to be the uncontested mark game. They have to try and get that uncontested mark game going. Now, we know Geelong are going to be onto that, but we expected Collingwood to be onto it as well, and they couldn't get it done. So I think that's the first port of call. Let's get that uncontested mark game going. Let's really stick to what we want to go after, and that was my criticism of them. I felt like they got spooked by the scoreboard in that first final. They had around 35 uncontested marks early in the second quarter, and they got a bit spooked by the scoreboard, and they started to try and go too fast and take the game on, which is what they did in the second quarter on the weekend against Collingwood. So I think that's their primary setup. I think they'll make some moves in terms of the matchups that are coming their way. We know Shane Mullen's going to go to Hugh McCluggage. I think they'll just say to Hugh McCluggage in the first quarter, just work your way through it. Just try and beat him. And then if that's not working for you, we'll move you to a wing. We might put you behind the ball. We might send you to half forward and roll you up as an extra forward. So I think early you just say to McCluggage, just beat Mullen on his merits. Just go and do your job and try and have an impact in the game. Rayner versus O'Connor is the interesting one because if I'm Brisbane, I think they got lulled into thinking Rayner could just be that dominant full forward because he had some impact doing that in Geelong earlier in the season. I'd bring Rayner up around the ball. When he's left isolated as a forward, yes, he can be dangerous, but he can also be out of the game for 40 or 50 minutes at a time. He was unsighted in the prelim and then he explodes. So I'd bring him up, getting involved in the game instead of getting to halftime and thinking, geez, I'd like to see a bit from Rayner. Get him involved early and allow him to do the job. And Zach Bailey, doesn't he make a difference around the ball? I know you miss Lachie Neale, but Bailey around the ball, he just gives you a point of difference. He plays as a midfielder like he's a forward. He's only thinking about getting on the move. He's only thinking about trying to get the ball and run out of stoppage and kick the ball forward. So my primary plan would be to get that uncontested marking game going, and then I'd be thinking about how to get my important players into the game by rolling them up and getting them away from goals and getting them in the game.
I wanted to ask you about Neil. I know this is going to get so much airtime as the week goes on, and we spoke about it last week, and you were basically of the belief, JJ, that there was no chance he would play, but the jungle drums are beating a little bit for him. I mean, he ran laps last week. We know that he's a player that can play through pain. Chris Fagan's spoken about that before. It is obviously a tremendous risk, but given some of the injury issues that they've had, it feels like it's more than a 50-50 now that he could play. Would you risk it though?
Again, we don't even have any of the information except for the fact that he's done one 8-kilometre session at Gosh's paddock on Saturday morning. So, Scott Penderbury's pretty good evidence of not going
just about
with it.
to say that.
Logan McDonald got taken into a grand final injured. Sam Reid, when I was at the Cats, got taken into a grand final, didn't last until halftime. There's so much. Phil Davis played a grand final when he had a bad calf, shouldn't have played. There's so much evidence that you shouldn't play him. So I don't think they will play him. We had Danny Daly on SEN on Sunday, and he gave him a big push as well. He said, this has just come from nowhere. That's why we ruled him out. And I just think the fact they did rule him out, it's not a broken bone that you're going to try and just get through the pain barrier. It's not broken ribs that you're going to try and jab up and play through. It is a muscle that will either survive or it will tear to the point where he can't play. It doesn't matter what he does and how tough he is, he won't be able to play through it. So I honestly don't think he'll play, and I don't think Jared Berry will play either.
Do you feel even more so though with the sub rule that I know it's a grand final and you don't want to get someone injured in the first quarter and then someone else gets injured and then you're obviously one man short, but just given the sub rule, do you feel like it just allows the Lions to potentially have more flexibility and potentially be more confident rather than, the history of the past with just 4 players on the bench?
Yeah, maybe, but it also restricts who you play as a sub. Then if you're semi-expecting Neil to have to be subbed out, then you've got to play that type of player in a sub role. Do they have that type of player? I'm not sure, but I just don't think. Chris Fagan said it himself in the post-match press conference. He said taking, paraphrasing, but he said taking injured players into grand finals doesn't work. So maybe they don't deem him to be injured. Maybe that's they're out there. But he certainly thinks he's available to play because he said I thought he'd be doing another really searching session maybe today or tomorrow, Monday or Tuesday. But it sounds like he's just going to do the normal training, which only involves a Wednesday or a Thursday main session, which won't be that much. So as far as he's concerned, he thinks he's going to play. But I don't think they'll pick him. They might pick him, but I don't think he'll play. I honestly don't think they can take the risk. And the same is to be said for Jared Berry. Now, they said after the first dislocation, if it comes out again, he's done. So it's come out again. They had the exact same scenario with Oscar McInerney in the prelim. They couldn't play him. It's a shame because he's one of my favourites. I just love the way he goes about it, but I don't think they can pick him either. And the way Bruce Revel played when he came in off the bench, I thought he was really good. So Brucey might get a run as a winger, full-time winger.
Well, Pato, who's away and somehow just remarkably not part of our grand final preview show, which is disappointing, but he was big on Bruce. It was his call in the semi. Unfortunately, it was just a sub, but he was really good on Saturday. But JJ, we were talking in the WhatsApp thread before we came on air, and you said you wanted to push an interesting matchup that you had for Harris Andrews in the grand final. So keen to see something that you would try if you were in the Lions coaching box.
So if I'm expecting Reece Stanley to play, I think he'll be the one that comes in for Tom Stewart. So I think Reece Stanley plays in the ruck. And look, I wouldn't go that way. I'd leave Blitzarves in the ruck. He's been so successful and he dominated against Brisbane in that first final against Darcy Fort. So I wouldn't pick Reece Stanley because Blitzarves has been so good in the ruck, but I'm almost certain they will. So I think Reece Stanley plays, and this matchup is on the proviso that Reece Stanley plays in the game. Harris Andrews, I think, has been the most impactful player in the finals. I think he's been so good in all 3 finals, even against Gold Coast. He goes straight to Ben King, shuts him out. He's averaging 18 disposals, 10 marks, and 5 intercept marks a game in 3 finals. He's been amazing. I would send the game's most versatile player in history straight to him, Mark Blicavs. Mark Blicavs is more than capable size-wise. He's 198 centimetres. He's north of 100 kilos. Trust me, he's very strong, and he's diligent enough to do the job. So the guys that have played on Andrews thus far, Shannon Neal in the first final, a little bit of memory at stages on the weekend, that they are, and Ben King the other, they are still playing against him as if they are the forward. They are the one being proactive. They're the one who gets to determine when they lead. He's just playing the game in the zone at the moment. He's reading the ball before the forward. He's letting them lead up into the junk and taking the marks. Whereas Blicavs, if you ask Blicavs to just play on his back shoulder, if he moves, you move. When the ball comes, just compete. Don't let him mark it. And then when it's on the ground, it's probably an advantage to Blicavs. So it would be the first time he's done the role, but I would play Blicavs on Harris Andrews because in a similar way that Billy Frampton did a couple of years ago in the grand final, if you can take Andrews intercepting out of the game, which really kickstarts Brisbane's halfback ball movement, you're halfway there.
Well, you totally fooled me because I thought you were talking about a play that Harris Andrews would go to, not someone going to Harris Andrews. So I'm fascinated to see how that one plays out. But one of the other big matchups, which is going to be really intriguing, is what Josh Dunkley does. What do the Lions do with Dunkley? Because obviously we thought potentially it's a Max Holmes matchup potentially, but then you look at the way Danger played in that prelim. It'd almost be madness to not stand Josh Dunkley next to Danger at stoppage. Yeah,
I think no doubt. Now, I haven't checked the CBA numbers. I'll try and do it on the fly, but Danger's CBA attendances have just gone through the roof in the finals. So at centre bounce, I would be sending Dunkley straight to Danger, and then maybe if Danger starts to get forward, then you can move Dunkley or ask Dunkley to change his attention or shift his attention to Max Holmes. So it changes the dynamic because, we're not even really talking about Bailey Smith, who had 36 on the weekend. So it's really interesting. I just don't think you can I don't think you can run the risk that Danger is equally as impactful as he was on the weekend once again in the grand final, because he is the one who can really take over the game. So I've got Danger's CBA stuff here. Hopefully they've got it. So he went to 44% of centre bounces on the weekend against Hawthorn. He went to 47% against Brisbane in the first final. And before that, he had been 19-0-0-0. So he hadn't been going to centre bounce at all. So I would send Dunkley straight to him. Dunkley's probably the best matchup for him in the competition at stoppage, at centre bounce. And then once he drifts forward, I reckon Starcevic will go to him and try and take him out of the game. The interesting one as well will be, there's a dog. It's certainly not a dog here. We don't own dogs. The interesting one will be whether Leicester goes back to Jezza, because Jezza got on top of him in that first final, or whether Darcy Gardner, who was really good in that prelim final on the weekend, goes to Jezza, because it's Jezza's one who, his record in finals is not off the charts, but he feels dangerous.
Yeah, it's a good call. It looked like Jezza was going to kick 19 goals in the first quarter in that qualifying final, and then it all just sort of fell away once they made that switch with Gardner. It didn't quite work with Leicester, so I'm very intrigued with that. Are there any other matchups you can see just maybe predicting around the ball? Obviously, Bailey Smith is someone that you can't just let run around. He had 36 in a prelim, which is obviously massive numbers. Where do you see any of the other midfield matchups that could potentially play a major role in the day?
Yeah, so, we'd be stunned if Shane Mullen doesn't go to McCluggage. We'll be stunned if O'Connor doesn't go to Rayner, and he can follow him at full forward or on ball or on the wing. It doesn't really matter for O'Connor. He's pretty versatile and flexible. I think Atkins might spend some time in the same way he played on Newcombe. I think he'll probably try and do that type of role to Will Ashcroft. Yep. He's building a pretty damn good final CV. Only had the 20 touches on the weekend, kicked 2 amazing goals, and had a really impactful game without needing to get the ball 30 times. Of course, he's the reigning Norm Smith medalist. So I think Atkins might spend some time on Will Ashcroft. And he's a really rare player, Ashcroft. I still can't get these numbers. I'm trying to find them. He starts on the bench so often, started on the bench again on the weekend. And clearly he's just got a great temperament. A lot of players would get really fizzed up by that, and it'd really set them off. I want to get my hands on the ball in the first 2 minutes, but it doesn't bother him, and comes into the game after 4 or 5 minutes and just does his thing. So they'd be the matchups around the ground. And I reckon in terms of Geelong's forward half, I think they might put some time into Darcy Wilmot. He's such a good player. I mean, it's funny when we call these players underrated, yet everyone knows they're great players. I mean, they're hardly underrated when we all know they're good players. But he's the one I think they'll put some time into, even over a guy like Zorko.
Absolutely. Link?
JJ, so the Cats are the team going in the hot form. It's been... Last time they won the premiership, they won 13 on the trot off the top of my head. They've had another nice little run of winning games going in. But Brisbane are the reigning premier. They've done it before. They've done it more recently than Geelong. How does the mindset of each team sort of going into this one, if you're the reigning premier versus the team with all the form?
Oh, I think both have every right to be supremely confident. Geelong have had, and I preferred their run in. I preferred that soft run in with sort of 1.5 or half a tough game, because I mean, when the finals come around, to flick the switch, that it's go time. So, these other teams, Brisbane included, have been playing, knockout finals or games where they must win for 8 weeks. So I like Geelong's run in. They've been able to time everyone and everything to perfection. They've had the week off, the extra week off, which is important for some of their older players, and they cover the ground so well. So Geelong deserve to be favourites. Geelong deserve to feel like favourites. But again, what we said off the top was Brisbane have just got the heart of a champion. And I don't think we really thought that about them until maybe the back half of this season, where they've had every reason and opportunity to say it's a bit too hard for us this year. We haven't got our co-captain. We've got other players who are injured. We haven't got our full back, who's such an important piece to what we do as well. So they've had every opportunity to say it's just a bit too hard. We're getting Draper. We're getting Oscar Allan. We'll be better again next year. We'll just go after it again next year. But they just keep fronting up. They just keep putting their head in the hole and going again. So I can't wait to watch the game.
Well, it's time for the predictions. I'll start with you, Link. So all I want is your winner and your Norm Smith.
I'm just going to say I want Brisbane to win. I hope they win. I think Geelong win by 42 points. I think.
Jeez.
Grand finals.
Wow.
Grand finals.
We have had some big margins in the last
Grand
years.
finals, more often than not, are blowouts. I love Brisbane. I really want them to win. I think Geelong are going to win by 42, and I think Bailey Smith's going to win the Norm.
Okay. JJ?
I'm so torn. My head does say Geelong by 3 or 4 goals. So I'll stick with that. You should always go with your head over your heart, particularly us analytical types. I would love to see Brisbane go back-to-back. I've just got so much admiration for the way they go about it. Norm Smith medalist, I'm going to go with Tom Atkins.
Ooh, I like it. Well, if he plays the way he did in that prelim final, he's definitely a chance. I think, unfortunately, I'm not going to be saying anything different here. I think it's the Cats. I don't think it's the 42 points, but I think they win comfortably enough where it's a sort of a 4 or 5 goal margin. And unfortunately for the Lions, I think it'll feel like the Cats are probably going to win all day. I don't know whether there's going to be too many moments where we think the Lions can overcome them. And my Norm Smith prediction is Max Holmes. I think... Really, he's a great story as well.
He's
Max
the
Holmes.
good feel story from the Cats.
The interview post-game, even it was a really nice touch with him being taken off the ground with sort of 2 or 3 minutes to go. I'm sure he breathed a sigh of relief there where he was able to sit on the bench and know that he's going to play the next week. And I just think he's such a line-breaking player. If he has, somewhere between 25, 30, kicks a goal, he'll certainly catch the eye of the umpires. So Max Holmes, my prediction, but geez, you'd be crazy to write off Danger as well, depending on what happens with those matchups. But
they'll be keen to give it to Danger too, just to cement and finish off the CV.
Absolutely. That is 100% right. But look, guys, thank you very much for that. We're really looking forward to Saturday. Anything else we want to say before we bid farewell?
Nah, nothing from me. Hopefully it's a fantastic game. Hopefully it's nice enough weather, and may the best team win.
Enjoy the game wherever you're watching.
Stay safe wherever you drink responsibly. Whatever you're doing, have fun. Enjoy the game.
Absolutely. Good call. See you, man. Well done.